Hello students, welcome to the lecture on Incoterms, and after this lecture we will be able to learn the following objectives. Explain Incoterms, define foreign exchange rates, discuss the factors affecting exchange rates, describe forward and CIF contract. Let's start with the concept of Incoterms. Incoterms are a set of rules for the interpretation of the most commonly used trade terms in international trade, international commercial terms. They were first published by the International Chamber of Commerce (ICC) in 1936 and since then have been updated in 1953, 1967, 1976, 1980, 1990 and the current revision 2000. Parties to a contract are often unaware that there are different trading practices in their respective countries. For example, FOB for an American company may have a different meaning to FOB for a UK trader. This can lead to misunderstanding and, in the worst scenario, costly litigation. Incoterms set out to avoid this problem by giving a set of standard rules that are recognized throughout the world. The basic purpose of each Incoterms is to clarify how functions, costs and risks are split between the buyer and seller in connection with the delivery of the goods as required by the sales contract. Delivery, risks and costs are known as the critical points. Each term clearly specifies the responsibilities of the seller and the buyer.
Incoterms are trade terms published by the International Chamber of Commerce that are commonly used in both international and domestic trade contracts. Incoterms, short for International Commercial Terms, are used to make international trade easier by helping traders in different countries understand one another. Incoterms were first developed in 1936 and are updated from time to time, in order to conform to current trade practices. Because of these updates, contracts should specify which version of Incoterms they are using. Trade terms used in different countries may appear identical on the surface, but actually have different meanings as they are used domestically. Incoterms are internationally recognized and thus help to prevent confusion in terms of foreign trade contracts, by helping sellers and buyers understand their obligations in any transaction. Examples of Incoterms include delivered at terminal, delivered duty paid and cost, insurance and freight.
Let us now discuss the Incoterms. Incoterms, short for International Commercial Terms, are a set of uniform international terms of sale published by the ICC. They are adhered to by most national governments and are in wide use for cross-border transactions. Each individual Incoterms specifies at what point risk is transferred from seller to buyer, how the expenses of transportation and insurance are to be shared by seller and buyer, and the seller's documentary obligations. Incoterms also define which party is responsible for government requirements, that is, export and import regulations. Incoterms do indicate each party's costs, risks and obligations with regard to the delivery of the goods, when and where delivery is to be completed, which party must comply with what government requirements, what are the modes and terms of carriage, what are the delivery terms and what is required as proof of delivery, where and when risk of loss is transferred from seller to buyer, how transport costs are to be shared between buyer and seller. Incoterms are not sufficient on their own to express the full intent of the parties. They will not define contractual rights and obligations such as price, quantity, etc., other than for delivery. Specify details of the transfer, transport and delivery of the goods. Determine how title to the goods will be transferred. Project a party from his/her own risk. The obligations of the seller and buyer. The main purpose of Incoterms is to clearly set out the obligations of the seller and the buyer in relation to the delivery of the goods and the division of functions, costs and risks related to the delivery. The way this is presented in each Incoterms is under 10 clauses each for the seller and the buyer, where each clause on the seller's side mirrors the position of the buyer with respect to the same subject matter, cost, risk elements. It is shared between seller and buyer. Goods. Provision for, payment for, licenses and customs formalities, carriage and insurance, risk delivery, risk transfer, costs, notices incorporating Incoterms. It is important to ensure that where the protection of Incoterms is intended to be incorporated into a contract of sale, that an express reference to the current edition of Incoterms is always made. Alternatively, suitable wording can be included in the contract stating that the contract is subject to Incoterms 2000. However, the standard contracts and any other standard paperwork mentioning Incoterms are updated to quote Incoterms 2000 rather than Incoterms 1990. Failure to incorporate the correct version of Incoterms could result in dispute as to which version is intended, or indeed if Incoterms were intended to be incorporated at all. Incoterms definitions changes. During the process of revision, which has taken about 2 years, ICC has done its best to invite views and responses to successive drafts from wide-ranging spectrum of world traders, represented as these various sectors are on the national committees through which ICC operates. Indeed, it has been gratifying to see that the revision process has attracted far more reaction from users around the world than any of the previous revisions of Incoterms. The result of this dialogue is Incoterms 2000, a version which, when compared with Incoterms 1990, may appear to have effected few changes. Rules for many mode or modes of transport. Carriage paid to CPT, carriage and insurance paid to CIP, delivered at frontier DAF. CPT, carriage paid to the CPT means carried paid to and is followed by a name place of destination. The CPT means that the seller must pay the freight for the carriage or the goods to the named destination. The risk of loss or damage to the goods and any cost increases transfers from the seller to the buyer when the goods have been delivered to the custody of the first carrier and not at the ship's rail. CIP, carriage and insurance paid. 2. The CIP means carriage and insurance paid to and is followed by a named place of destination. The CIP has the same Incoterms meaning as CPT, but in addition, the seller pays for the insurance against loss of damage. DAF, delivered at frontier. Seller delivers when the goods are placed at the disposal of the buyer on arriving means of transport, not unloaded, and cleared for export but not cleared for import at the named point and place at a land frontier. The seller bears all costs and risks up to this point but is not responsible for customs clearance, duty or taxes. Rules for domestic and international trade. Incoterms rules have traditionally been used in international sale contracts where goods pass across national borders. In various areas of the world, however, trade blocs like the European Union have made border formalities between different countries less significant. Consequently, the subtitle of the Incoterms rules formally recognizes that they are available for application to both international and domestic sale contracts. As a result, the Incoterms rules clearly state in a number of places that the obligation to comply with export-import formalities exists only where applicable. Two developments have persuaded the ICC that a movement in this direction is timely. Firstly, traders commonly use Incoterms rules for purely domestic sale contracts. The second reason is the greater willingness in the United States to use Incoterms rules in domestic trade rather than the former Uniform Commercial Code shipment and delivery terms. String sales. In the sale of commodities as opposed to the sale of manufactured goods, cargo is frequently sold several times during transit down a string. When this happens, a seller in the middle of the string does not ship the goods because these have already been shipped by the first seller in the string. The seller in the middle of the string therefore performs its obligation towards its buyer not by shipping the goods, but by procuring goods that have been shipped. For clarification purposes, Incoterms rules include the obligation to procure goods shipped as an alternative to the obligation to ship goods in the relevant Incoterms rules. Now moving on to the next topic, we will study the foreign exchange rates. The exchange of one currency by another or the conversion of one currency into another currency. Foreign exchange also refers to the global market where currencies are traded virtually around the clock. The term foreign exchange is usually abbreviated as Forex and occasionally as FX. The foreign exchange market provides the physical and institutional structure through which the money of one country is exchanged for that of another country. The rate of exchange between currencies is determined and foreign exchange transactions are physically completed. A foreign exchange transaction is an agreement between a buyer and a seller that a given amount of one currency is to be delivered at a specific rate for some other currency. Functions of the foreign exchange market. The foreign exchange market is the mechanism by which a person or firm transfers purchasing power from one country to another, obtains or provides credit for international trade transactions and minimizes exposure to foreign exchange risk. Transfer of purchasing power. Transfer of purchasing power is necessary because international transactions normally involve parties in countries with different national currencies. Each party usually wants to deal in its own currency, but the transaction can be invoiced in only one currency. Provision of credit. Because the movement of goods between countries takes time, inventory in transit must be financed. Minimizing foreign exchange risk. The foreign exchange market provides hedging facilities for transferring foreign exchange risk to someone else. Advantages of FX transaction. Benefits include provide cash flow certainty, provides exchange rate protection. Settlement periods are available in a case of forward. Disadvantages of FX transaction. Disadvantages include a FX transaction does not allow the benefit from future favorable exchange rate movements. There may be a cost if the FX transaction is terminated prior to the settlement date. Let's know the meaning of factors affecting exchange rates. All forex trading involves the exchange of one currency with another. At any one time, the actual exchange rate is determined by the supply and demand of the corresponding currencies. Keep in mind that the demand of a certain currency is directly linked to the supply of another. Likewise, when we supply a certain currency, it would mean that we have the demand for another currency. The following factors affect the supply and demand of currencies and would therefore influence their exchange rates. Monetary policy. When a central bank believes that intervention in the forex market is effective and the results would be consistent with the government's monetary policy, it will participate in forex trading and influence the exchange rates. A central bank generally participates by buying or selling the domestic currency so as to stabilize it at a level and it deems realistic and ideal. Judgment on the possible impact of government's monetary policy and prediction on future policy by other market players will affect the exchange rates as well. Political solution. Growing global tension will result in instability in the forex market. Irregular inflow or outflow of currencies may result in significant fluctuations in exchange rates. The stability of a foreign currency is closely related to the political solution of that place. We will illustrate how political factors influence exchange rates with some actual examples. For example, at the end of 1987, the US dollar was suffering from continuous depreciation. In order to stabilize the US dollar, the G7 finance ministers and central bank governors released a joint statement on 23 December 1987 announcing plans for a large-scale intervention in the forex market. On 4 January 1988, the group started to dump Japanese yen and Deutschmark in huge volumes while buying US dollars. This resulted in a rebound of the US dollar and maintained its exchange rate at a stable level. Balance of payments. Balance of payments of a country will cause the exchange rate of its domestic currency to fluctuate. The balance of payments is a summary of all economic and financial transactions between the country and the rest of the world. It reflects the country's international economic standing and influences its macroeconomic and microeconomic operations. The balance of payments can affect the supply and demand for foreign currencies as well as their exchange rates. Interest rates. When a country's key interest rate rises higher or falls lower than that of another country, the currency of the nation with lower interest rate will be sold and the other currency will be bought so as to achieve higher returns. Given this increase in demand for the currency with high interest rate, the value of that currency will rise against other currencies. There is an example to illustrate how interest rates affect exchange rates. Assume there are two countries, A and B. Both countries do not exercise foreign exchange control and capital funds can flow freely between them. As part of its monetary policy, country A raises its interest rate by 1%, while the interest rate of country B remains unchanged. There is a huge volume of liquid capital in the market that flows freely between these two countries, seeking out the best possible interest rate. With all other conditions remaining unchanged, as country A's key interest rate rises, a large portion of the liquid capital will flow into country A. Market judgment. The forex market does not always follow a logical pattern of change. Exchange rates are also influenced by intangible factors such as emotions, judgments, as well as analysis and comprehension of political and economic events. Market operators must be able to interpret reports and data such as balance of payments, inflation indicators and economic growth rates accurately. In reality, before these reports and data became available to the public, the market would have already made its own predictions and judgments, and these will be reflected in the prices. Exchange rate fluctuation risks. The exchange fluctuation risk cover is intended to provide a measure of protection to exporters of capital goods, civil engineering, contractors and consultants who have often to receive payments over a period of years for their exports, construction works or services. Where such payments are to be received in foreign currency, they are open to exchange fluctuation risk as the forward exchange market does not provide cover for such deferred payments. Terms of the exchange fluctuation risk cover. Exchange fluctuation risk cover is available for payments scheduled over a period of 12 months or more, up to a maximum of 15 years. Cover can be obtained from the date of bidding right up to the final installment. At the stage of bidding, an exporter contractor can obtain exchange fluctuation risk cover. The basis for cover will be a reference rate agreed upon. The reference rate can be the rate prevailing on the date of bid or rate approximating it. The cover will be provided initially for a period of 12 months and can be extended if necessary. If the bid is successful, the exporter contractor is required to obtain exchange fluctuation cover for all payments due under the contract. The reference rate for the contract cover will be either the reference rate used for the bid cover or the rate prevailing on the date of contract, at the option of the exporter contractor. If the bid is unsuccessful, 75% of the premium paid by the exporter contractor is refunded. A cash market transaction in which a seller agrees to deliver a specific cash commodity to a buyer at some point in the future. Unlike futures contracts which occur through a clearing firm, cash forward contracts are privately negotiated and are not standardized. Further, the two parties must bear each other's credit risk, which is not the case with a futures contract. Also, since the contracts are not exchange traded, there is no marking to market requirement, which allows a buyer to avoid almost all capital outflows initially, though some counterparties might set collateral requirements. Given the lack of standardization in these contracts, there is very little scope for a secondary market in forwards. The price specified in a cash forward contract for a specific commodity. The forward price makes the forward contract have no value when the contract is written. However, if the value of the underlying commodity changes, the value of the forward contract becomes positive or negative depending on the position held. The CIF contract is that when the seller has delivered the goods or provides them a float. Seller has to perform the contract by tendering confirming documents to the buyer. The significant feature of a CIF contract is that performance of bargain is to be fulfilled by delivery of documents and not by actual physical delivery of goods by the seller. Seller's rights and duties. The rights and duties of sellers are: the seller is required to deliver the goods on board of the vessel at the agreed port of delivery. However, in contrast to an FOB contract, the seller can also procure the goods afloat which are already shipped. It is also seller's responsibility to provide an export license. Buyer's rights and duties. The rights and duties of buyers are: the buyer has no under obligation to procure a ship, place and shipping time. On the other hand, the buyer's main duty is to accept the documents, which will be explained in detail later, if these documents are in conformity with the contract of sale. Buyer has accepted the documents, he must pay the full price of the goods. Furthermore, the buyer must take delivery of the goods at the agreed destination and has to bear all unloading costs. The buyer has only to pay any customs or other duties which may impose in a CIF contract. For instance, payment of the freight is the buyer's duty and also it is a condition of the contract. Passing of title. Under the CIF contract, the documents play a very important role. When the buyer has received the documents, he has a title on the goods. After receiving documents, he can demand to delivery of the goods at the port of the arrival and also can sue if there is any damage or losses in the goods. That is to say, the general presumption is that the property in goods pass to the buyer when the documents is delivered to him by the buyer and at the same time has to do payment. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. Seller delivers when goods pass the ship's rail in the port of shipment and must pay costs and freight to the port destination. Incoterms rules have traditionally been used in international sale contracts where goods pass across national borders. A foreign exchange transaction is an agreement between a buyer and a seller that a given amount of one currency is to be delivered at a specified rate for other currency. Balance of payments of a country will cause the exchange rate of its domestic currency to fluctuate. The CIF and FOB contracts are the most important contracts in the field of international trade.